Well, I think we had a pretty cool day today, and hopefully you guys out there learned something. There's never enough time in a day to get through the things that we hoped we'd get through, but hopefully we did enough for that to be helpful and to be the beginning of the way in which you can actually make a sequence work. And obviously, given time, there are more inserts to be had, more camera movement to be pushed in, and thank you to our great class. Some really nice suggestions, especially the one about the moving foot, and the lighting was mediocre by my level, but just giving you an idea of some of the tools and how you can kind of use them. So I think we had a really great day, and more tomorrow, and not sure, I haven't got no idea what we're going to do tomorrow, but it'll be exciting, I promise you that. I'd like to particularly thank Brian Valenti, because I think this is the second prize, the Running Man rig. He just gave away another huge gift on the last presentation with Vincent Laforet, so I think it's very generous of him, and congratulations to Sean with his baby today, and let's take some questions if we have some.
Absolutely, we have some in the audience.
Right. Yeah, I have one. I was thinking about classic films. For this scene, I thought like maybe Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte or Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Do you look to old films for inspiration in some of the creative things you do?
Sometimes, and I think more for the look of the lighting than the actual camera positions. We on House on episode 15, we did lots of references to we shot a scene in actual black and white film, which was kind of fun because I hadn't done that for a while, and it was based on To Kill a Mockingbird, and so the lighting I sort of studied very carefully on that film to see, because that's a more traditional form of lighting, and those were in the days when actors used to be able to hit their marks. And that's no joke. I mean, if you look at some of the classic Hollywood movies, if an actor's half an inch off their marks, their eye light is down here, and it was that precise. And on the other hand, they wouldn't do take after take after take to get it right, but the world has changed in terms of lighting styles and so on and so forth. So, in terms of your question, yes, I do, but more for lighting and less for camera positioning.
I've got one. Some of the things I've really been trying to take away are the really low budget ideas that anyone can do. Like I noticed just cutting up the foam core board to break up the light through the window. And, I know like in some movies like Lord of the Rings, they used white Christmas lights to reflect in someone's eyes. Do you have any more of those kinds of lighting tips that anyone can do on any budget?
Funnily enough, our low budget trickery is all going to come out tomorrow, a lot of it.
Oh.
That was what our day 3 was going to be, how you achieve quite a lot of effects when you don't have any money at all. And so hopefully you'll learn an awful lot about that tomorrow. So we'll save that tomorrow, otherwise we'll be just sitting here with nothing to talk about.
Sounds good.
When you were talking about, shooting a sequence, you did like the establishing shot and then 2 shots in the rain and 2 shots on Tim, and then there was the special shots. Is there, like, when you're doing it a shot list, do you ever cap it at the type, you could go on forever with doing all sorts of different shots, but is there any, like, is it a type of shots that you cut out, or you make sure you wouldn't overshoot a scene?
Well, it's really difficult. It's probably the reason I'm not a director. I mean, some directors, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on, if you have time, then directors will use every minute they've got to shoot extra shots and things like that to give themselves freedom in the cutting room. And, and it's fairly disappointing as a DP sometimes when a director kind of says to you at the end of a scene when you have to move on, oh, I wish I'd got that shot. Because you really feel for them, because that might have been the shot that made the sequence just that little bit more special. And and that happens quite a lot, especially in television, because you know, you never know, you know, that reference I made before about how it's like Gone with the Wind in the morning and, you know, Dukes of Hazzard in the afternoon. It really is like that, because, you know, things happen during the day that slow the process down, and suddenly it just seems like within minutes you're hours behind, and that can happen to everybody. And so it is really difficult. Compromises need to be made. That's when things like the Steadicam gets pulled out very quickly.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and an awful lot of a scene is covered with a single camera shot, you know.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes a scene that was destined to be in a room might suddenly take on legs and end up being a walking shot down a corridor, which is a very quick way of covering a lot of dialogue. You know, you have actors walk around a corridor about 4 times, and you've covered 3 pages of dialogue in one shot. And you know, so there are lots of tricks and techniques to sort of help you get back on schedule. So you know, but of course, you know, on the other hand, some directors are so incredibly self-confident in their ability to know exactly how a scene will cut that they will not shoot a frame more than they need, because they don't want somebody being able to change their vision.
Okay.
You know, and that happens quite a lot. I mean, there are some directors very famous for that. I think Sidney Lumet was very famous for just shooting exactly what he wanted, and I think Steven Spielberg too doesn't shoot excess material. He knows exactly what he needs, and in the case of House Greg Utanis, one of our director executive producers, is very precise about what he needs. And you know, and I often say to him, don't you need a shot of this? And he says, no, don't need it, you know. And so it's kind of interesting. Everyone has a different way of working. I mean, if you're a guest director, it's slightly different, because you don't want to be accused of not having given the editors enough material to be able to change the pace of a scene, because if you just shoot too little, then you're stuck with sometimes the laboriousness of a scene. And if you feel the acting wasn't 100% and you want to cut a few words and things like that, you don't have the extra shots, then that can sometimes be not possible. And so guest directors tend to cover themselves quite a lot more than directors that have been on the show for a long time, you know. Cool.
I have a question from JQ. I'm not sure if we touched on this already, but do you need to worry a lot about continuity issues with the shadowing on the close-ups, reverse angle shots, different from the master?
Within reason, I don't worry too much about it. And I think if you, you know, if you end up looking for that, there's something terribly wrong with the performances. I think, you know, sort of cheating light angles is kind of perfectly acceptable. And for example, when we went over the back of Lorraine on the last setup, we didn't have the brightness on her hair that we had when we were looking at her coming through the window, because it would have been, first of all, very distracting and taken the eye away from Tim. And it's best to let her go darker. And I, you know, to be quite honest, I think it's more important than to concentrate the eye on where you want the audience to look than to be absolutely religious about lighting continuity. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I have a question from Earthrock. Do you set up lighting scenes thinking about how the score and Foley will work with the production?
No, nobody knows what the. It's very rare that on a TV show or even on a movie they know what the music will be before the film's completely cut. That's a process that happens later. The only time I ever knew that was when we were actually shooting The Commitments, where, you know, we knew what numbers the band was actually going to sing in each sequence, and that was part of the action. But in in terms of music track and Foley and things like that, you never generally know what that's going to be, because that's dependent upon the feeling of the film and the rhythm of the film when people like the editing before the music is chosen.
So just a quick follow-up question on that from KL was, do you talk to the sound people before you set your camera and lights? So any sound, I guess.
Yeah, we try and work together as much as possible. It's I tend to use a lot of soft light, so that makes it a lot easier on the sound guys, because hard light tends to create harder shadows. One of the big problems we have on house is being really observant about incredibly faint reflections in the glass from microphones and things, and it's a real trap, and we get caught quite a lot with that, you know, just seeing the very faintest of reflection. It's very often very difficult to see through the viewfinder, and you know, so we do get caught with things like that, or you know, sort of, it's surprising the things that end up in shot that people just don't notice, like a sandbag in the bottom corner of frame, or an apple box that's reflected in a glass door, or, I mean, there are very famous old movies. I think there's that classic old movie, El Cid. I think there's a grip reading a newspaper in the middle of a film that took place about 600 years ago, you know, just on the side of frame, and it happens, you know. You know, and if there are some famous sort of classic mistakes like that, you know, like somebody eating a donut sort of sitting in the crowd at Ben-Hur, you know. These things happen occasionally, and it's amazing the things that you can miss, just especially when you're tired and you're working long hours, and you know, and operators' eyes get tired, and it becomes actually more difficult in the digital world, because you're trying to judge everything off a horrible little digital viewfinder, as opposed to, you know, a ground glass like in a traditional camera. So,
Question from DeGuinta, who would like to know if you have any suggestions for maintaining a certain look for a TV show from episode to episode.
Sorry, for maintaining a certain look.
Like, I'm not sure if they mean, you know, is it just your style that comes across from episode to episode on House, or are you really kind of thinking about ways that you can maintain the same look from episode to episode?
Well, I think all DPs tend to have a style, so it's probably as much to do with that as anything else. And when I took over in season 3 on House, and so the look changed very distinctly at that point, because I had a completely different lighting style to the DP that was prior to me, who tended to use a lot more hard light. And I'm not a great fan of hard light. I love soft light and rounded edges and, you know, nice gradation and stuff like that, which takes longer and makes it more nightmarish in terms of reflections in glass. But it makes you what you are, I suppose. You know, but some directors that come on the show insist on, you know, stylistically changing the game completely, and so that happens. You know, we had some guest directors come last season that really wanted to change things up a bit, and that's kind of fun, you know, when you do something different.
A question from Bernardo Villos.
I hope there's something here for Stephen, because...
We'll look for some techie questions. This question is, are you using the rule of thirds as much as possible framing the actors?
Well, that would be more a question for my camera operators, but you know, the rule of thirds is kind of like, or I don't know, it's one of those painterly kind of things that I really don't have an awful lot of time for. I think if a composition looks good, it looks good, and sometimes, you know, we do what we call short-siding, an actor where the long space in the film is actually behind them rather than in front of them. So the rule of thirds isn't actually something that I believe a lot of photographers or cinematographers actually follow in any way at all, that I've heard of. Have you heard much about? I mean, it's almost like something you get in, Painters 101. It's rather like, yet another rule to be broken. I think it's whatever looks good to you,
They read all the Hitchcock books.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah.
drills it into your head. That's like
Yeah.
that's a film school question.
Yeah.
Stephen, I have a question for you. From Michael R. Given your self-taught experience, what is your top recommendation for the indie filmmaker?
For just making films and moving forward,
Yeah.
you mean Google? Seriously? Just everything you can possibly imagine is on Google. Somebody's done it, somebody's doing it, and then just try it and rent stuff and get your hands on the most gear you can. Put out ads, go to the free seminars, take the classes, read a lot. Just
Watch Creative Live.
watch Creative Live. So, on the free days.
All right, Gail, I think we have one final question for you today, and then we'll save the rest for tomorrow. This question is from Viewfinder Visuals. You seem to be constantly pre-visualizing the shot and using your imagination to create new shots. He wonders whether you have a built-up visual library in your head, in addition to which painters, photographers, cinematographers that you draw on for inspiration. So kind of a two-part question.
I actually take each scene as it comes. I love walking around art galleries and looking at paintings, and I think that's always a good exercise for photographers and filmmakers to look at composition and painting and all of that stuff, because it gives you such good ideas for visuals. I've got so many favorite cinematographers. I mean, there's guys like John Toll, who I think is wonderful. One of my favorite DPs is a guy that most people have never heard of, a guy called Jeffrey Unsworth that shot 2001 with Stanley Kubrick. And I've worked with a lot of wonderful DPs, guys like David Watkin that won the Oscar for Out of Africa, and a lot of the Italian DPs are fantastic, Storaro and Giuseppe Rotunno, and there's so many great DPs in the world. And they're way above my league, that's for sure. So it's always inspiring to see wonderful work, and it doesn't stop when you're young. It goes on for an awfully long time. The Road to Perdition was a beautifully shot film, and absolutely stunning. And I think good work is around you wherever you look, and it's just a matter of everybody has their own taste, and the reality is that in fact everybody steals from everybody else. You see good things and you adopt it as your own idea, and there are guys like I was lucky enough to work with a wonderful French DP, Philippe Rousselot, on the Emerald Forest, and he uses China balls, paper lanterns, and always has his whole career, and so that's one idea I stole from him, and steal from the best is my best advice.